Mediterranean diet, let's double click a little bit on that, because that often is a word, I guess, or a diet that gets thrown out there a lot. But I think when many people hear it, they think, well, hang on, people in Italy eat a little different to people in Greece, and people in Greece eat a little different to those in France. And, what is a Mediterranean diet? So as a researcher, when you're looking at it and when you're saying, okay, we have evidence that adhering to this Mediterranean diet reduces risk of cardiometabolic disease, and I'll get you to kind of expand on what evidence we do have. But what does a Mediterranean diet in that context actually mean to you? What does it look like on a plate?
Yeah, it's another good question, because as you mentioned, it really depends which country you're in. And I think a lot of this really started in the 1960s in Crete specifically. So this is in Greece. And the Mediterranean diet, from what I would think would be the traditional Mediterranean diet, that's high in fruits and vegetables. It's high in nuts. Olive oil, or particularly extra virgin, is the main source. There is lots of legumes, maybe a little bit of dairy and eggs, and it's quite low, and lots of fish, and then it's quite low in red meat. And sometimes there will be some wine consumption with meals.
So what would you say to someone, because often I'll see on social media, someone will post something about a study showing Mediterranean diet was associated with lower risk of, and you could reel off a number of things, whether we're talking about type 2 diabetes or dementia, a bunch of different conditions. And they'll say, well, I went to Europe and I was at such and such location, and I can tell you the locals were eating a lot of red meat. And they get a bit confused by things. I think they then start to wonder, well, is the Mediterranean diet in those studies, is it associated with a good health outcome because these people that they've seen in real life are eating a lot of pork or red meat, for example? How would you go about sort of helping someone or helping explain to someone how you are looking at the Mediterranean diet in studies and why what they're seeing in person may not actually be reflective of the published literature?
Yeah, I actually lived in Spain for a little bit during my PhD, so I also noticed that the diet's not exactly what you think from studies. But typically in the research studies, and I'll use cohorts, and then I'll use trials as well. So I think one of the more well-known trials that we have is PREDIMED. So in the PREDIMED study, this is a Mediterranean diet. They supplemented with either nuts or extra virgin olive oil. In terms of what you might see for protein, there's quite a bit of fish and legumes, and there is a little bit of red meat, but it's really recommended to consume white meat over red meat in those trials. And then specifically in cohort studies, when we are doing some analyses of these, we use it's a scoring system, and specifically it's going to be high in fruits and vegetables again. It's going to be high in nuts and legumes. There's going to be low saturated fat and higher monounsaturated fat, so coming from things like olive oil. So it really is more plant-based than what you might see when you're visiting some of the countries.
The important thing to note here being that the associations that are shown in the literature are based off of this scoring system. And so when a study says the Mediterranean diet was associated with better health outcome, that's based on that sort of scientific definition of a Mediterranean diet being rich in these whole plant foods, rich in unsaturated fats, low in saturated fats, some room for meat and red meat, but it's certainly not a sort of focus of the diet. Would that be fair?
Yeah, exactly. And whole grains as well, which I think I forgot to mention. Yeah.